Oh my goodness. This person is brilliant.
People will talk to me over the phone and then they meet me and they're like, wow, you're Asian.
You're hearing it first for the first time, right? On the Critters and Cultures podcast. Hello and welcome to Critters and Cultures, the podcast where we explore the fascinating intersection of animal welfare and cultural diversity. I'm your host and veterinarian, Dr. Azallia Boyd, ready to uncover how cultural differences influence, enhance, and sometimes challenge the way we care for animals and, let's be honest, relate to each other. Join us on this journey through global traditions, learning from diverse perspectives and advocating for empathy and respect in all of our interactions. This episode is made possible thanks to Maddie's Fund, championing a more inclusive, innovative, and compassionate world for pets and people. So I will always say hashtag thanks to Maddie. And thank you guys so much for joining me on another episode of the Critters and Cultures podcast. If something resonates with you during the podcast today, please feel free to send me a direct message or you can comment below. So welcome back to Critters and Cultures. Today, we're diving into a topic that doesn't always get the attention it deserves, but touches so many lives. Accent bias, accent discrimination. Last year, I had the honor to support the program committee at the Humane Canada Conference, and I heard today's guest speak on this very subject, and I will be completely honest, he knows this as well. I was obsessed. So it struck me right away because it's not something we often talk about in veterinary medicine, not something we talk about in animal welfare when discussing inclusion, yet it is such a powerful part of culture, identity, and belonging. So I immediately knew that I had to bring Doc on to have this conversation. Dr. Wesley Chung is a shelter medicine veterinarian with a background in general practice, emergency and critical care, and community medicine. He has recently completed his residency in shelter medicine in June. Yay, 2025. Congratulations. And has joined Haven Veterinary Service as a shelter consultant. On the side, he has also been pursuing a certificate in linguistics through the University of Texas, San Antonio, and published an article on accent discrimination in the University Journal. Doc, it is so good to have you here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So accent bias is one of those things that many of us don't even think about. It's just not something that's mostly on people's mind when we're talking about inclusion. And so I am honored to have you on the show today to help us learn more about this. So we'll unpack your story, we'll unpack your work, and hopefully get the listeners and the viewers, they can find out how they can recognize and interrupt their own bias, right? And in their own spheres, and even in myself, because I am always a learner. So before we get into it, though, I ask every podcast guest an icebreaker question because I want the audience to get to know you in a different way. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
All right. Your icebreaker question is, if you could eat only one meal for the rest of your life, what would that be?
The answer's not going to be great.
Don't tell me it's pizza. Don't tell me it's pizza.
No, it's a large McDonald's fries.
Oh, no.
I know, I can't.
It's all good. Listen, when
I'm sorry.
was pregnant, that's all I ate was McDonald's fries during my pregnancy. And my son ended up okay. So it can't be that bad, right? It can't be that bad.
Yeah.
It's something about the McDonald's fries. That's your weakness. Oh, that's funny. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, so let's dive into it. Tell me a little bit about your background.
Okay, so I grew up in Hong Kong when I was younger. And when I was 13, I moved to Europe. It was quite a monoracial and a racist environment where I moved to. It was like semi-rural. And I haven't really told anyone this, so this will be a podcast exclusive. But
you're hearing it first for the first time, right? On the Critters and Cultures podcast.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So when I was growing up, for various reasons I won't go into, but I didn't have the best relationship with my family and my parents, but we've repaired that since. And so when I was 13, I didn't really have my parents to fall back on. I didn't have a backup plan. I just had to tough it out. And when I was that age, I had a different accent. I had an ESL accent, so English as a second language accent. So I couldn't read English out loud. And I remember in class, we had to take turns reading pages of a novel, as I think is normal. So I couldn't do it. I tripped up every second word. I was mocked, I was laughed at. Some of the teachers defended me, some of them didn't really care. So I knew I had to assimilate somehow. And I remember making it my biggest goal every day to change my accent, to assimilate. And so the way I did that was we had to go to church service every day, and there were readings and there were hymns. So I used that time to trial a different accent in a more covert way. And for some reason, I ended up with this accent. It's like a very like international, but for me, I've made peace with this. I think for everyone, all of our experiences shape who we are today. Without any of those experiences, we won't be who we are, right? And I won't be here talking about this topic if I hadn't gone through all of that.
Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for getting personal. And really, like, my mind is just imagining a young child, trying to quote unquote correct the way in which you spoke. Right. And
Yeah.
doing that silently and like what that might have been and what that felt like for you. And I am sure that many, 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 many other children with different accents have done that anytime,
Hmm.
we do try to assimilate, right? That whole piece of assimilation is, why do we do that? Are we doing it for safety? We're doing it for acceptance. We're doing it so that we're not getting teased in class by evil, rotten kids, because kids are just evil, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's just really disheartening to hear, but I agree with you 100%. I feel like that is why your message is going to go so far, and why your research is going to go so far, and why this is going to go so far for you. And I just think about the lives that are going to be impacted even after just listening to this podcast alone. Maybe another child won't have to go through maybe some of the same stuff that you went through.
Yes. Yeah, I hope so.
What do you think about your accent now? You mentioned that, but do you think it's like a standard accent?
I don't yeah, I don't like labeling accents as that, but I don't think
Uh-huh.
every accent is different. Everyone has a different accent. No two accents are the same. More importantly, sorry, that's just my cat. More importantly, for a lot of people, changing their accents is just not a reality. Like if you think about having to put on a different accent, like a British accent or an Australian accent forever, for a lot of people that's impossible. So the reality is we shouldn't be expecting that people would be able to change their accent. We should just be expecting that we should play a bigger part in the conversation to help people, to help mutual understanding.
All right. Well, you're a veterinarian and you just completed a residency in shelter medicine. So I did want to acknowledge that again. I know we said that in a bio, but that's a lot of work. So congratulations. When did you first notice accent bias or discrimination? Like, what led you to study this? As well as being a veterinarian, what led you to study accent bias academically?
Many studies have shown that accent biases cause a lot of trauma to people to varying degree, and depending on how it manifests, like bullying or shaming or mocking or excluding. For some people, it leads to suicidal thoughts even. But there's a bigger piece, a systemic piece, like unfair treatment at work or unfair hiring practices. And for me, I've always been intrigued by why people speak a certain way and why people are treated differently based on the way they speak. And during COVID, I had more time, like a lot of people did. And so while my husband was collecting plants, like he was in Australia, he was collecting plants, I was in Canada, I took my trauma and I turned it into something more positive so that it would be something that will help others understand how big of an issue this is and how they can contribute to positive change. So that's what drew me to studying social linguistics. And that's when I learned that accent bias is a huge form of discrimination that's just widely accepted here in North America, at least, and that disproportionately affects people of color. So I wanted to learn more about this and show people what they can do to combat this.
Yeah, that's incredible. Can you share either a moment in the professional world? Yes, you had this time and this passion to change something.
Mhm.
What was something in the professional world or maybe personal when accent bias impacted you or someone else?
So I've heard a lot of stories in the veterinary animal welfare industry, vets being discriminated against, or shelter staff being discriminated against, or clients being discriminated against. Mostly my interactions, I would classify are racism, like people that didn't want to see an Asian doctor back in Australia when I was doing ER work. But I was curious what people were facing day to day. So this inspired me to send out an informal survey to shelter staff and veterinary staff to ask about other people's experiences with accent discrimination. And what I got back was really shocking. There were some that I can tell are definitely accent discrimination because they were conversations over the phone, like with an adopter over the phone. A shelter staff was explaining instructions of care or what to look out for a cat's behavior. And then they would just repeatedly say, I don't understand. They were really frustrated. They would guess the speaker's accent, like, are you Iranian? Are you speaking Spanish? And they didn't offer any help in the conversation to try and guide both people to mutual understanding. They were just being really frustrated and then just venting without doing anything productive.
Mm. That is, it reminds me of a time that I saw. So you do emergency as well, right? So we both do emergency medicine. And I saw a client come in one day and the dog, they were Spanish speaking clients. And I know we're talking about language and accent totally different, but definitely still aligns, right?
No, yeah, still,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, so Spanish speaking clients, and they told me that their dog had been vomiting for about a week. They took the dog to a vet clinic maybe midweek and was explaining what the symptoms were to that clinician. And I said, she said the clinician put us on some medications. And so I look at the medication, and one is an NSAID. And for those that are listening, NSAIDs are not something that you ever want to use in the face of vomiting, right? And the other one was an antibiotic. And so I am like spending time and I am asking these questions like, okay, well, was there a infection or was there was there pain? And, everything that they were saying was no, like our original complaint was that there was vomiting. Now, hindsight's always 2020, especially in the emergency world. So I'm not putting any blame on anyone, but I did think that in that moment there was a language barrier, but, and whether the staff took the time to actually ask the questions and make sure that they had a point of understanding versus just being completely frustrated and
Yeah,
just saying like, hey, pain meds and antibiotics and you're going to go out
yeah,
the door, and
yeah,
how tragic that could be for that patient, right? This patient could have
yeah.
received a gastric ulcer, how horrible that actually is.
Yeah, totally. And just like the stories I shared in my presentation, it's really similar. Like what I talked about with the ER vet that had a pattern of treating clients with non-standard foreign accents differently. And the important point here is that accent discrimination, shockingly, has massive consequences on animal welfare, which I did not know
Massive.
before I started started this research and the
Right.
surveys.
And so I'm going to highlight some things here, some studies that I found. So a 2010 study in Journal of Language and Social Psychology found that speakers with non-standard accents, and I like the way that you phrased it, non-standard foreign accents, were rated as less intelligent, less competent, and less credible compared to those with quote unquote standard accents, even when the content of what they said was identical.
Yes, yes. And what's worse is that they've repeated these studies every few years, and the results are still really similar. Yeah,
This is why I'm not really a researcher. I think research is important, but I'm like, when we get research, what do we do then? Like, how do we use this information to move things forward? There was another study, a 2018 report from the UK's Social Mobility Commission revealed that 29% of employees admitted they faced bias due to their accent at some point in their careers, with ethnic minority accents facing the steepest penalties, like you mentioned. And then another one in the US, research has shown that job candidates with foreign sounding or non white associated names and accents are
mhm,
35% less likely to receive callbacks for interviews compared to those
yeah.
with quote unquote standard American English accents. What do you think about all that?
So I did read those studies during my research.
Yeah.
Um, so that just goes back to what I was saying. It's like the more we expose ourselves to different accents, the better chances are that we'll connect with others and reduce accent bias. And that has been shown in studies, even if it's temporary, like short-term exposure. And for the second part with the hiring practices, it is very important. One of the biggest things is to have fair hiring and staff evaluation processes and making sure that at least hiring staff and managers are trained in accent bias, even if it's circulating a piece of evidence-based literature, like the excerpts that you just read out about the prevalence and the impact of accent biases on these candidates.
I think that's huge because we talk about our industry is doing it and they're doing a really good job. I will say that. Like, I love being in the veterinary industry and I like to see how things, and I love your cat's tail, your cat's tail sliding across. But I love that our industry, like 10 years ago, we weren't heavily talking about this as much as we're talking about it now. And even with the political state of the world, it's still something that maybe some terms and things like that are being adjusted and finagled a little bit. But I do think that in vet med, it is something that DEI, belonging, inclusion is being highlighted and the work is continuing to be done. So I really hope that this finds its place in the laps of all of the CEOs, those at the top, right? Because I think a lot of it actually starts at the top, and
Yeah.
how our leaders react and respond are going to trickle
Mhm.
down, right? And I don't like to say down, but in that manner, trickle to the rest of the staff. But I was actually talking to my girlfriend and I was like, oh, I'm so excited. I get to meet Dr. Wesley today. We're going to talk about this. And I told her what the topic was. And her gut reaction was, yeah, but really, I just want to be able to understand people clearly, right? This episode of Critters and Cultures is brought to you by Maddie's Fund, a family foundation that believes in a world where every pet has a loving home and every family has the support they need to stay together. Inspired by a beloved miniature schnauzer named Maddie, the fund is transforming animal welfare through innovation, education, and equity. Whether it's funding groundbreaking foster programs, supporting community collaboration grants, or offering free online learning for animal care professionals, Maddie's Fund is investing in the people and ideas that move us forward. They also believe that inclusion matters because real change happens when we uplift every voice in this work. Learn more, get involved, or start donating today at maddiesfund.org. And I will always say, #thanks to Maddie's.
Maddie's also funded my internship, and so it was a really special place in my heart. I also talk about them in my lectures to students and what
Okay.
a massive impact they had on developing residencies and research in shelter medicine. So yeah,
Yay! So we are really saying
thanks
thanks
to
to
Maddie's.
Maddie's on this episode. So just to go back, some people listening might go
Mhm.
like, yep, that's the point. That's what I was thinking. Accents can make communication harder. I heard your answer to this a little bit. You were like touching on it. But for those that say, isn't it fair to prefer someone who speaks more clearly or speaks my accent? Or it stalls communication. I just want to be able to understand. It's not that I have a bias. How do you respond to that?
So I would say, firstly, people should keep in mind that, like I said, it's nearly impossible for an adult to modify their accent significantly. And so any exposure, any type of exposure to different accents have been shown to improve mutual understanding. And let's say you're in a conversation with someone and you don't understand someone's accent. The majority of cases, it's because you're not familiar with someone's accent. And it's not because of the other person's fluency in English. And so using yes or no questions, using simpler questions, pausing between topics, or asking for clarification, like, if I'm understanding correctly, you're saying blah, blah, blah. Could you spell that out for me? Could you repeat that last part? And then the second thing I would say is use back channel cues, which is like, it's kind of like nonverbal communication. And so human gestures are different between cultures, but facial expressions are pretty universal. Like, when someone's angry, when someone's sad, frustrated, happy. And so personally, I find that the hardest thing for me to control is facial expression, because sometimes you listen to people, you're going like this, your brows. So it looks like you're frustrated, and that's not great. But what I'm really trying to do is to concentrate and focus. But I'm
Yeah.
really working hard to control it. And the last part is nonverbal communication. Yeah. And so during this process, as you're doing this, you will determine whether this is a communication issue because of the person's English fluency. Because if it is their fluency and they're struggling, then you have to use a translation service.
Right. So
Yeah.
fluency is something totally different
hmm
than accent.
Yeah, I was gonna say, for example, my husband's Singaporean, so we go to Singapore. For a lot of people in Singapore, English is their first and sometimes only language, but they'll speak with a heavy Singaporean accent or Singlish. It doesn't mean that they're not fluent. They are fluent. They've spoken English their whole lives. It's just that some people are not familiar with that accent. And I would guess it's similar with Caribbean accents and with where people have to code switch.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
was just thinking that. I was just thinking that. So we have fluency in English, you have accents, and then you have like the Caribbean, because I know we mentioned this a little bit. Like my parents are Caribbean. And so there is a whole, I want to say it's another language, but it's English
Yeah.
with some additional, verbiage and dialect, I would say, called patois. But one of the things that I wanted to touch base with you on is this, and I don't know if it came up in your research at all, is tone. And I don't know if they're all tied together, right? So when people tell me they listen to the podcast and they're like, oh, you have a media voice, you're so well spoken, or they just say like, oh, you didn't sound black, or you do sound black, or you sound, as you're going through research, does that also tie into accent discrimination, the tone of one's voice, the pitch? Maybe that's what I'm asking, if it's like a pitch thing.
Yeah, I think it ties in with your upbringing and positionality because as you're growing up, you modify the way you speak initially from how your parents speak and then from your friends as you're going through primary school. So then in linguistics, we describe this as a sound house, like you're building a house. So for every person, their house is different, like the walls are different. And so you look at your friends' houses and then you'll modify your house. So I would say with people that say like, oh, you don't sound black or you don't sound Asian, I think that's more to do with the stereotypes they have in their head as to what a black person should sound like, what an Asian person should sound like. And I go through that too. Like people will talk to me over the phone and then they meet me and they're like, wow, you're Asian. I'm like, yes, I am.
Yes, I am. What were
Yeah.
you expecting? No, I
Yeah.
completely get that. There is
Yeah.
definitely, those are the biases, right? Those are the
hmm
biases, whether it's conscious or unconscious bias that we have.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those are
Yeah.
the stereotypes that we have. So whenever people tell me like, "Oh, I don't have any stereotypes." No, actually, your brain is going to do
Yeah.
it. No
Yeah.
matter, like, your brain is going to form
Yeah.
these thoughts. It is up to us
Agree.
to kind of, right? It's up to us to kind
Agree.
of check that
Yeah.
and acknowledge that it's there and acknowledge that this is how the brain works. And I completely agree. Like, based on my mom's accent, born in Jamaica, raised in Jamaica, came over at an adult age, as a child, I would always hear her answering the phone differently, right? So it's like,
hmm
hello, this is, Anne Marie. But as soon as she hangs up the phone and she's back talking to me and my sibling, my sister, it's completely like, yeah, man, wagwan, blah, blah, all of that,
Yeah.
right? But she would never let that accent outside of the house, would never, because she too also experienced being teased. So it's interesting that for me, you're saying that I saw that growing up and I adjusted the way that I talk and the way that I am, my sound house, based on what I saw my parents go through.
hmm Exactly.
Incredible, incredible, incredible. So I like the fact that you said things that listeners can do immediately to interrupt accent bias in their sphere. You said stop, challenge yourself, essentially. You be a better listener, determine whether this is a fluency versus an accent thing, right? And I'm just going to add to that. Like, one of the things that I think people can do immediately, right away, is check their gut reaction.
hmm
The next time that you hear someone with an accent, pause and ask yourself, am I judging their intelligence? or credibility based on how they sound instead of what they're saying, right? Like immediately check that. We didn't get into code switching, but that does happen. That does happen for us too. And I think that that's kind of along the same lines of what we were mentioning. But it's unfortunate that people have to code switch.
Yeah,
It's
because
just unfortunate.
I hazard guess to say that, like you were saying, all of us have some form of underlying bias, which includes accent bias, even if we're not conscious of it, because we've just been conditioned since such a young age to think that some accents are ugly and some are exotic or favorable, and we just have to check ourselves, like you said, and make sure it doesn't affect how we treat people.
That is like make sure that it does not affect the way we treat people. So knowing that situations like that where a receptionist will answer the phone and talk to a potential adopter or talk to a client that has a question about a sick pet and really forget the fact that people are asking for assistance to help this animal and just make it so much about the accent. And then the phone's hung up and it's like, what happens then? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree. I think that people can also practice slowing down conversations, being more empathetic. I was watching something on YouTube the other day and it was talking about accent empathy, which I thought was interesting, right? Give people space to finish their thoughts rather
Mm-hmm.
than rushing them or trying to correct them or trying to get an answer out of them that's not
Yeah.
actually what they're saying. The point about, and I think you spoke about this during your presentation, the point about the individuals that have this, you called it ESL, right? English as a second language, accent. How brave are these individuals? How intelligent are these individuals? Like most of the people that have, I'm going to put in air quotes, these standard accents know one language. Like, how incredible is it that someone might be going through 4 different languages in their head and have
Yeah.
accents from the places and the experiences that have made them? So, really, we should be saying, like, oh my goodness, this person is
Yeah.
brilliant.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I think in the podcast notes you wrote like to the pearl of wisdom. That was my one.
Oh, okay. Let's get to it. I'm going to ask you that
so
right now.
so yeah, like I said in the presentation, a lot of actors can't even put on an accent for the duration of a movie. How do we expect people to do that for a lifetime? Yeah.
I love this conversation completely. And I'm going to go back to that pearl because I want you to
Mm.
really dive into it. I want that to be the last thing that
Yep.
people hear. But I love this conversation. It reminds us of how something as simple as the way a person speaks holds so much history, identity, and meaning. And everything that you show and discuss with us today shows us that accent bias isn't just about communication. It's about who we value, who we trust, whose voices we choose to elevate. And so thank you for joining the podcast today. This is exactly the reason why the podcast was birthed, with the mission to reduce bias and open up space for diverse perspectives. And so this episode definitely challenges all of us to notice those snap judgments we make about the voices and about the accents, and instead to choose to listen differently. So thank you. Before we close, I do ask each guest to leave a piece of cultural relevance, something meaningful from your life, identity, or heritage that someone out there might carry with them. It could be a tradition, a proverb, a memory, a favorite dish, or a value that grounds you. What's something that you'd like to offer as a cultural gift to our listeners and to whoever comes next on this journey?
Whenever you speak with someone with a foreign non-standard accent, always remember it likely means that they are smart enough to juggle at least 2 or more languages, or that they're juggling code switching between accents and dialects, and they are brave enough to speak to you in their second language. So I hope that we can all just be proud of our own accents.
Thank you, Dr. Wesley. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you guys for joining us on another episode of the Critters and Cultures podcast, where we explore the deep connections between humans, animals, and the world around us. Remember, every person has a story, every creature has a story, and every culture has its wisdom. Until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and keep discovering the wonders of our shared world. Thank you so much.